Shabbat Shalom, Sam and Aaron. What an excellent Devar Torah. So thoughtful. You brought in so many different sources that I think many of us haven't seen before. And you really gave us a window into your experience as twins. Give us so much to think about. Thank you. I want to respond to you as you inspired me to do some really deep thinking about what it is to have a sibling, what it is to have a twin, what it is to have a sibling, what it is to have a relationship with another human being. I love that you wrote your Devar Torah together. I don't think we've ever had anyone, any twins or anyone, write a Devar Torah together with someone else. And I feel like your medium was your message, that your message was about the particular closeness of twins in your experience and the possibility with playing with the word te'om and te'um, the possibility of cooperation that's there in being a twin, in being a sibling, in being in relationships. It was a great way for, I think, for all of us to think about how do we relate to others. Most of us, unlike you, are born into the world singly. We spend our months of gestation alone and we emerge into the world alone. And most of us also die alone. And much of what it is to be human is to be at least a little bit alone. No one else is exactly like you or like me or like anyone. And not even when you're lucky enough to have a twin, as you described, being a little bit different demonstrates that you are an individual, even if you have a twin. And even if you were identical twins, right, you would be different from each other. But all of us, 100% of humans, spend our existence in relationship. We develop in the womb of our mother. We're born to parents or caregivers. We live at all times in relationship of one kind or another. Some of those relationships may be closer and some may be more distant. None of us singly born people can know what it's like to have your experience, to have the closeness of a birth mate. But whether it's siblings or parents or other loved ones or friends, everyone exists in the context of relationships. A major theme of the Torah is the question of closeness and distance between people, and actually between people and God, as you brought into your Devar Torah, about oneness and togetherness versus separateness, about similarity and difference. Twins are a concentrated version of siblings, and siblings are a concentrated version of relationships. And sometimes, as you touched upon, there's competition, there's anger, there's jealousy, there's violence. And sometimes there's peacemaking and compassion and forgiveness. And the Torah is exploring the tension between the longing for closeness and the need for individuation, between the desire for dominance and the desire for nurturance. When we move from Genesis to Exodus and to the rest of Torah, the focus expands from family to tribe to nation, from the question of how you treat your sister or your brother to the question of how you treat your fellow Israelite or the stranger or the foreigner. And all of it is what it's like to be an individual among other people, about the ethics of relationships, about where our responsibility to one another begins and ends, and the question, how do we live together in peace? That's the central question, whether it's with our twin or whether it's with the other nations of the world. In fact, this parsha is explicit that this sibling relationship is a stand-in for an international relationship or a relationship between nations. 2 nations are in your womb, God tells Rebekah. 2 separate peoples shall issue from your body. 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. The assumption underlying the Jacob-Esau story is that success is dominance, that thriving is winning, and that winning is defeating someone else. The assumption is that in this relationship, at least in this relationship, mutual success, the idea that when you do better, I do better, that a rising tide lifts all boats, that idea is impossible in this relationship, in the structure and the setup of this relationship. That there's going to be one blessing, there's going to be one birthright. That's it. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. That my gain has to be your loss. And I think there's a way that many of us can relate to that experience of seeing someone else, a colleague or a friend, shine or have great success. And rather than feeling pure joy for them, feeling that somehow we're a little bit diminished by their success, that somehow our success or our light is less bright if they shine. When God says of the two brothers, the two nations, Ule'om mile'om ye'ematz, one will be mightier than the other. Rashi says it means when one rises, the other will fall. About the idea that Jacob was born holding on to Esau's heel, Rashi says that it is, quote, a sign that this one, Esau, will hardly have time to complete his period of domination before the other, Jacob, will rise up and take his power from him. In this imagination, life is a zero-sum game. You're either dominant or subservient, success or failure, winner or loser, and winning depends upon someone else's loss. This is representative of a worldview that is so widespread, I would argue that it is usually even unconscious for most of us. And it is assumed that that's how the world works. It's a worldview that has most recently, most crassly, and most relentlessly been expressed by our president. It would be impossible to be sentient in the last 4 years and not to have become aware of this message, that you're either a winner or a loser, that success is dominance. And actually, this is something of a gift, because if it was already in us in a more subtle form, now we are aware of it. We can't help but be aware of it. And we have the opportunity right now to examine it within ourselves with greater consciousness. The prophet Malachi, from whom you read this morning, just after the part you read in verse 10 of chapter 2, says, have we not all one Father? In fact, that verse is up on the wall in the sanctuary where you are. Did not one God create us? Why do we break faith with one another, profaning our covenant? We come from one source, the same source. We are interconnected. Of course, there are some things in the world that are defined by winning or losing. Chess, for example, soccer, elections. But our greatest human challenges, the successes that are by far the most important for our survival and well-being, are not like this. The most immediate and obvious example is climate change. You cannot win at reversing climate change by defeating others. It just doesn't work that way. You cannot restore the ecosystem through domination of others. Success requires the cooperation you taught us about, Aaron and Sam. It requires our awareness of our interdependence. We either all succeed together or we all fail. There is no better place for us to learn and practice this most important concept of mutual success, of winning together, than in sibling relationships. Sibling rivalry is natural at some stages of our development, but in time, many of us learn to bask in the glow of our sisters' and brothers' achievements, to be proud of them, to learn from them, and to genuinely derive pleasure from our brothers and our sisters thriving. This can be true among people in general, and it can be true among nations. The assumption in this week's parsha that there was one birthright, one blessing to be had, that one brother had to dominate the other, was an entirely unnecessary assumption. The brothers could each have become different expressions of the family legacy. In fact, in the end, Isaac did give both sons a blessing, and they did each go off to succeed in different ways, not needing to dominate the other in order to thrive. Sam and Aaron, may we follow the example that you have given us today with your joint Devar Torah, your interwoven teaching, and see our success as interwoven with one another's. May we learn through our closest relationships that we too can mutually succeed. May we learn to lift each other up. May we learn to share our birthright. Our very survival may depend on it. Shabbat Shalom.